Hello and welcome to the Autocar show. Now the vehicles we're talking about today are practical, especially if you do a lot of out-of-town runs, you have airport runs, you have a large family. Well, not only practical, they're great for the Indian roads and they are good value. We're talking MUVs. Now there's been one that has really been the king of the segment, and that's the Toyota Innova. Mahindra did come in with their Xylo with great value, lots of space. It still didn't manage to dethrone the king of the segment. But of late, both cars have been refreshed. The Toyota's got a makeover, so has the Xylo. The Xylo, also on the top-end variant, has a brand new M-Hawk engine. So, all put together, will it be enough to now dethrone the king of the segment? We'll have to find out. Well, at first glance, the Innova has acquired a more Camry-like front. There's a wider grille with restyled headlights, the revised bumper, and the larger air dam with new ridges on the bonnet that make all the big differences. The rest is in the detailing. The rear view mounted indicators, the new side skirts, reprofiled tail lamps, and a wider chrome bar on the tailgate are all garnishing. The Innova looks good and feels strong as it always did, and the build quality still feels better than that of the Xylo. The Xylo's design tweaks have taken away what most people didn't like about it. It looks less gawky and way more proportionate now. The big changes are the new squarish profile bonnet that drops down to a smaller grille and restyled headlights. The interesting part is about how, with a little color play and stickering, the M&M engineers have made the Xylo look more gainly. There's the blackened part of the skirting on the bumper edges and the side skirts. And when you look in more closely, there's the blackened B, C and D pillars, with an almost translucent stickering under the window line and along the bottom between the tires that manage to make the Xylo look less tall and longer. It's interesting, but it doesn't make the Xylo a Style Award winner. There's a lot of changes to the interior of the Xylo as well. Coffee brown plastics and leather seats on the top E9 variant we tested add a touch of class on the inside. Then there are the smaller details. The door handles, for instance, feel a lot more robust, and the rounded gear knob is much nicer to hold. However, the dashboard is a carryover from the earlier Xylo with a smaller digital drive assist system. In the E9 Avatar, the Xylo gets steering mounted controls for the audio player and also Bluetooth telephony and cruise control systems that are all new inclusions. But you get a lot of new gimmicks as well, like this voice command system, which works with a touch of the button on the steering wheel.
Command, please.
Wipers on.
Wipers on. Command, please.
Wipers off.
Wipers switched off. Command, please.
Right indicator on.
Right indicator on.
Well, a really fun gimmick to have, because I don't know how practical it is. Every time you want to give a command, you have to press the button on the steering wheel. Might as well stretch your hand out and use it to put the indicator on or off yourself. Still, I have to say, it works really well. The Innova gets a few changes too, like a reverse camera now, which works well and removes the guesswork when parking an MPV into tight spots. Top-end Innovas also get climate control, a feature not available on the Xylo. All plastics now come finished in a lighter hue of beige, while the 4-wood trim looks quite convincing. The Innova also gets reworked Optitron instruments, which remain easy to read. As on the Xylo, the Innova 2 has dual aircon, dual airbags and keyless entry. The interesting new addition is the touchscreen interface on the central console that works pretty well. The big thing is that overall, the quality on the Innova interior feels much richer. Well, these cars are meant to be people carriers, so we should find out what all three rows feel like to be in. Front seat of the Xylo, driving position really nice, visibility is good, you feel high up, There's a lot of width over here, so feels nice and roomy as well, and the seats themselves comfortable too. But let's see what the two at the back have to say. Well, no room for complaint, but loads of room for everything else here, whether it's leg room, whether it's width, whether it's height. The middle row of the Xylo is extremely comfortable. Set the front seats to the position I would sit in, and I would say there's even a 6-footer and more would be amply comfortable over here at the back. There is one thing that's missing, and that is the adjustment for a forward-backward movement of the middle row. They're fixed to the spot, you can't move them, but you can recline the backrests. But let's see what the back row has to say. Well, back row of the Xylo, I have to say, is pretty impressive on space. In the Innova, you do sit up in a bit of a knees-up position, but I've got leg room over here and a little bit more. Since those seats don't move backward or forward, I know this position is pretty much fixed. Feels a little tight, but yet good enough for a third row of seats. Now the front seat of the Innova feels more car-like because you sit a lot lower. You're not as high up on the road, but you do feel it's a little bit narrower. Well, the front may seem like that. The middle rows also you do sit lower than in the Xylo. You're not as high up. And legroom seems to be pretty good back here. The one advantage is that this seat has the forward-backward movement. So if you were to measure, probably the Xylo would have more space. But because of the seat moving forward and backward, you can free up just as much as you want, and it feels much better on the legroom. However, the width is still narrower, even in the middle row. Well, definitely tighter over here in the third row of the Innova. I'm sitting in quite a knees-up position, and there's just barely a little bit more of room between my knees and the seat. Plus, the seat also itself feels very, very upright, not too comfortable. There is an adjustment for the backrest though, but that means you'll get less space in the boot.
The Xylo's high floor means you have to trek your way into the cabin. But in the Innova, with the seats just at the right height, you can literally walk into it. So it's a much easier vehicle to get in and out of, especially for older people. The crucial advantage that the Innova has over the Xylo is with luggage space. Even with all 3 rows in place, you can still store a few soft bags, providing the third row of seats is upright. The Innova also is more generous in terms of storage space for smaller items inside the car. The new E9 Xylo we had gets the M-Hawk 2.2-litre 120 bhp engine, whilst the Innova retained its recently upgraded BS4 2.5-litre D4D that has 102 bhp.
Now the M-Hawk engine is one we've always loved. We like it in the Xylo. It's refined, cruises very comfortably, a great highway engine. But the beauty of it is that it's really good in the city as well. You can be a really lethargic driver, amble around in a higher gear at lower RPMs, and yet this engine is ever enthusiastic. Put your foot down and it's always ready to go again.
Not only the bottom end, the mid-range is strong too, and the top end feels comfortable, making this M-Hawk really an all-rounder. And clearly better enough to distance it from the Innova. The 0 to 100 kilometers comes up in just 12.9 seconds, almost 5 seconds ahead of the Innova. It's also mated to a new gearbox that makes it more efficient. The gearbox feels a little softer, but it's notchy and not as positive as that of the Innova's. Now the Innova's gearbox may be better, but the engine is clearly the chink in its armor. It's not so bad at the bottom. It pulls cleanly from 1000 RPM and is extremely drivable. But where it isn't so good is in the highway speeds. The Innova feels best cruising at around 80 kilometers an hour, after which the engine gets quite noisy and there's not much grunt either. Compounding the matter is the noticeably short 5th gear that keeps this engine spinning at rather a frenzy, even for a diesel, at 100 kilometers an hour. It's simply outclassed by the M-Hawk that seems to do it all in a relaxed and refined manner. There's no straining, no effort, and yet it's punchy and drivable. Now when you drive the Xylo, you feel like Man Mountain Jake, you sit high up, the car feels big and you feel pretty invincible. But this height really goes against the Xylo because there's so much movement that it just doesn't inspire confidence, doesn't make you feel comfortable when you're driving it around. Be it straight line stability or cornering, there's just too much movement. This feels all over the place.
The new Xylo does feel a little bit better with improved damper ratings, but the difference is too marginal. The high center of gravity is what really plays spoilsport for the Xylo. There's far too much rocking from side to side, giving the impression that you're captaining a boat. The Xylo also feels quite nervous under hard braking, as the rear has a tendency to step out. Now this is where the Innova scores ahead of the Xylo, and by a considerable margin.
Now what always amazes me is this car is 6 years old. But when it comes to handling, they got it right the first time and it still feels right. It's just pretty unbeatable, the Innova. I mean, it feels so car-like when you drive it. You don't feel like you're in an MUV. It's very stable, very planted, minimal body movement. Be it straight line stability or going around corners, the Innova is really the one that makes you feel way more confident.
In terms of driving dynamics, the Innova is in a whole different league. Its lower stance and slightly stiffer suspension make it feel a lot more composed on the highway.
Well, neither of these two cars is one that you'd really take to chuck around a twisty, windy road, but say you had to do a Ghat section, which one would be better? Well, in a perfect world, I'd want a hybrid, a combination of both, the engine, the M-Hawk from the Xylo, and the handling and the composure of the Innova. But it's not a perfect world. We have to live with compromises, so even though it would mean a few more gear shifts, the Innova makes you feel so much more comfortable and confident around the corners. It's the one I would take.
The Innova's body control and superbly tuned suspension also give it the leading edge as far as ride is concerned. Now at low speeds like the kind you do in the city, the Xylo does have a softer edge and cushions you better. But go over a speed breaker and the back bounces up like a bucking bronco, and that makes it uncomfortable. The Innova in comparison may be slightly firmer, but that's only in comparison. On its own, it feels just fine and far more together.
Well, this may not be as roomy as the Xylo, especially in the middle row, but what's way better is the ride quality. It's so flat, it's so composed, you don't get tossed around in this back seat, feels very car-like, and long journeys just don't feel like long journeys in the Innova.
Where fuel economy is concerned, the Xylo edges out ahead of the Innova.
The new E9 variant of the Xylo, the top-end version, is really the one that competes with the Innova. Now it's refreshed on many accounts and looks much nicer from the outside, much better put together, the interiors feel much better, and the new M-Hawk engine, that's really its strength. You also can't take away from the fact that the Xylo is a great value for money proposition, giving you lots of bang for your buck. But despite all those good things, I still feel better in the Innova. Now, there's loads of reasons for that. Main one being the flat, composed ride that it offers. This one just makes you feel so comfortable and car-like when you're inside it. It doesn't feel like an MUV at all. The engine may not be as punchy as that of the Xylo, but it's still a drivable engine. Space may not be as much as the Xylo, but a few adjustments here and there make it feel just as good enough. And of course, there's the factor that really steals the show. That's the interiors, the fit, the finish of the Innova that just feel a class above. Feels like a more expensive vehicle, feels much better, and gives you a kind of finesse and feel-good factor that you just don't get in the Xylo. Well, it may be more expensive, but we would still pick the Innova, especially because the value of that will be something you would realize even more 3 years down the line.